For those who are kind of new to the phrase, can you maybe briefly explain in layman's terms what you mean by quantum physics?
Certainly. We all know from basic science that everything's made of molecules, and that molecules in turn are composed of atoms, and atoms in turn are made up of electrons, protons, and neutrons. But now, since the advent of the 20th century, and certainly now that we're well into the 21st century, we know that electrons, protons, and neutrons are made of yet a smaller particle of electromagnetic energy known as quanta. So this indicates that everything on a subatomic level is made of the same energy. And so what that means is that you and me, the air that we're breathing, this pen on my desk, everything at the most basic level is composed of electromagnetic energy. But it just doesn't end there. It's our entire planet. It is the space between the Earth and the sun, the nuclear reactions in the sun, and the distance between the sun and other stars. In other words, everything is energy. And this goes back to something that Albert Einstein said, is that there is no matter. There's just energy which vibrates at different frequencies so as to be perceptible to the senses. So this is what a lot of the great spiritual teachers have said is how everyone, we're all brothers and sisters because we're all energy, but it's even more than that. We're all energetically interconnected. And while that may have been a philosophical discussion 130 years ago, now it's scientific fact.
Okay. So let's dive a little deeper. What about biophotons? I don't know much about them, but I understand that there's a connection between biophotons and spirituality.
Biophotons are fascinating. Okay, let's say you drop a bowling ball on your foot. You know immediately that that hurts. And we know that the nervous system runs on electrical impulses, but doctors have wondered for years, how does that information get so from the foot to the brain so quickly? Well, we know it's not chemical, and of course it's electrical, but now we found that biophotons are ultra weak light photon emissions in our individual cells. They were first identified in 1923 by Alexander Gervich in Russia. And over the ensuing decades, they've been analyzed. And in fact, in 2012, MIT's Technology Review issued a paper that says that biophotons are the basis of cellular communication. So what this means is that our cells communicate with each other through flashes of light. We know that flash is electromagnetic energy, and that energy conveys information. So, Albert Einstein, I know I quote him a lot, but he was so advanced in so many ways. He said that we are actually beings of light. And this is really true because based on recent discoveries and the relationship of what biophotons do within our bodies, and not just our bodies, plants and animals also have biophotons. They've even discovered them, I believe, in mushrooms. So every living entity has biophotons, which indicates that the light that is within us is the same light, the same form of light, the same form of electromagnetic energy, which is visible to the human eye, which is light, that we see with. Now, the connection between biophotons and spirituality, think of the term enlightenment. When you are enlightened in the spiritual sense, this means that you are finding a connection with the divine power that many people refer to as God. And the reason I say this is that every great spiritual teacher, from Krishna in India 5,000 years ago, through Moses, through Buddha, through Jesus, Muhammad, Lao Tzu, the Native American spiritualists, we can go all the way up to the modern era, have referred to God in terms of light. People who have a near-death or shared-death experience refer to an encounter with this divine, all-pervasive love as the light. And we know that all life on this planet is dependent on light. If it weren't for the light of the sun, then Earth would just be a frozen chunk of ice wandering through space. So everything, both in the physical sense, is dependent on light, but it also is in the spiritual sense. And the reason that we've entitled this episode as From the Cosmic to the Subatomic, the eternal light flows through us all, is because the light of the divine is the same light that is actually generated within our bodies on a cellular basis. And if you'll indulge me for one more moment, I believe that this has been identified by many great spiritual teachers, or anyone really who's had a spiritual experience throughout history. Look at Moses in Exodus 3. Now, we're all familiar with Moses climbing up to Mount Sinai, and he encounters the bush that burned yet was not consumed by the fire. So if Moses was having an interaction with an intensely concentrated form of electromagnetic energy, in other words, God, how would he describe that? Since he lived in the Bronze Age, he would have to be using vernacular and terminology of the day. The most powerful form of radiant energy he would have known about, outside of perhaps lightning, would have been fire. So he would be describing it as the fire which burned and yet did not burn. In the New Testament, in Acts 2, when the Christ, he's completed his mission on earth and he's ascended, departed. And in Acts 2 is the Pentecost, where the disciples of Jesus and his mother Mary essentially are channeling the power of the Holy Spirit, and they see tongues of fire appear upon everybody's head. Now, this is a enlightenment moment. These people are becoming enlightened, but they're also becoming enlightened. And enlightenment is a term that I developed in my book, Evidence of Eternity, to describe the embracing of the inner light which is in us. So that's why the light of the divine flows from the cosmic into the subatomic. And it's not just Christianity and Judaism that refer to this. Hinduism and Buddhism talk about the energy centers throughout our body, which are known as the chakras. And the crown chakra, which is at the top of the head, when people who do aura work see chakras, and you see the crown chakra, it kind of flickers. Well, the apostles lived in the Iron Age, 1st century AD. How would you describe seeing something like that in the terminology of the day, but as a tongue of fire that flickered above their heads? So I believe that it's all interrelated, and that science and faith should not be in opposing or even adversarial camps. And I think that one of the benefits of the 21st century is that we're beginning to bridge the divide between faith and science.
That is such a fascinating explanation. Thank you for that. Now, it also brings up another question. Many of my more religious friends, people who are possibly what you would call fundamentalists, they believe that using psychic abilities or mediumship, etc., they believe that it's sinful. But as you just mentioned, the descriptions in the Old and New Testament, that's, I think, a beautiful explanation. How would you reconcile these two?
The Bible's filled with prophets, and when mediums and psychics are good guys, they're prophets. For example, when Joseph interprets the dreams of Pharaoh, when Pharaoh is having the disturbing dreams that there were 7 fat ears of corn that were devoured by 7 little scrawny ears of corn, and the 7 fat cows emerging from the Nile were devoured by the 7 skinny cows. And they brought the Hebrew Joseph, who had the gift of dream interpretation, and he foretold the future by saying there'd be 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine. Then there's the book of Samuel, where Saul consults the witch of Endor. Now, this is the biggie, because this is where a lot of the stone-throwing religious fanatics, I don't call them Christians, I call them religious fanatics, say that, well, mediums are not of God. Because what happened was Saul was having a really bad time. The Philistines are on the march. David's popularity is going off the charts. His most trusted advisor, the prophet Samuel, had died. So Saul goes to the witch of Endor, who really should be called the medium of Endor, but he goes to the witch of Endor, and she brings forth the spirit of the prophet Samuel, who tells Saul that his time is at an end. Right after that, Saul's defeated in battle. His sons are slain, and eventually he dies by his own hand. So the rabbis, the rabbinical community of ancient Judea said, see, that's what happens when you talk to those people. And it's believed by a lot of biblical scholars. This is where mediums really get a bad rap. But there's another way of looking at it. Did not Saul serve an important purpose to unify the kingdom of Judea? And then when his time was at an end, was it not the will of God for David to emerge as the king of Judea, the king of the Jews? And then if we go into the New Testament, was not Jesus a descendant of David through his mother Mary? So you can sit here and pick and choose verses out of the Bible, but there are several in support of spirit communication. One of my favorites is I believe it's in 1 Corinthians verses, I think it's 2 through 18, where it gives a list of the gifts from God, two of which are prophecy, which is foreseeing the future, and the second is discernment of spirits. Similarly, in Romans 12, verses 6 through 8, it once again lists gifts from God, and it says, if your gift is one of prophecy, then you shall prophesy in accordance with your faith. So there's a lot of people who want to find this negative. The way that legitimate mediums look at this is that religious people, not faith, religious people don't want you to consult with mediums, because what we're telling you is you have a direct connect to God through your own heart, whereas these organizations are businesses and they want you to give them money, and it's all about control, where they say you can't connect with God unless you come through us, our dogma and our clerics, and by the way, you owe us 10% of your income. So there's various ways to look at this. And I want to be perfectly clear. I have absolutely no problem with faith or with religions. Where I have a problem is when people use their belief system to justify anger, bigotry, hatred, and violence, because then it ceases to be about faith in God and it becomes about the human ego, which is edging God out.
Thanks for listening. Check out Castle Gate, a novel based on my own ancestral healing journey, at lisabonis.com. In 1921, 4 men set off from Scotland to the United States. Will Garrock, his brother Pete, his son Willie, and his nephew Thomas, all coal miners. They left behind the miners' rows and the nationwide mining strike with its soup kitchens. Their destination was Castlegate, Utah, where they had kin to welcome them before sending for their wives and children. They prospered in America, working in one of the finest mines in Utah. Until that tragic day, March 8th, 1924. Disaster struck. 3 explosions, trapping 171 men inside. Rescue crews worked tirelessly for days, but sadly, they could not save a soul. Women were widowed and children were orphaned, and some never recovered from their broken hearts. Castlegate is the true and tragic saga of a Scottish family whose dreams of finding their fortunes in the bountiful coal mines of Castlegate, Utah during the Prohibition era explode in one of the most devastating mine disasters in American history. Learn more at lisabonis.com.